All right, let's jump right into it today with something that I'm sure is on everyone's mind as they're studying for the UPSC mains. Pegasus spyware.
Yeah.
I mean, this thing's been everywhere, right? It's not going away. And for good reason. This stuff is like straight out of a spy movie. But, this deep dive is all about getting you prepped for mains. So we're going to be looking at how this tech actually works, this implications for India, of course, and why a recent U.S. court case, yeah, you heard that right, matters for you in India. We've got some great sources for today's dive, a recent U.S. court case against the company that makes Pegasus, and some background info on the spyware itself. So by the end of this, you'll be able to drop some serious knowledge bombs on those mains questions about governance, security, even ethics. So to kick things off, let's get back to basics for a sec. What is Pegasus spyware?
Well, it's basically a piece of software that can sneak onto your phone and not just kind of look around. It can actually take your data and
Yeah.
even turn on your camera and microphone without you knowing. Yeah, it's pretty freaky, like full-on digital spying.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, spyware is definitely the right word. But how does it actually get on your phone? Do you have to, download something sketchy?
That's the scary part. Often you don't have to do anything at all. One way is through these things called exploit links. They can look like anything, a news article, a message from a friend, you name it. And if you click it, bam, your phone is infected.
Okay, that's already pretty bad. But I think our sources mentioned something about missed video calls, too.
Yeah. Pegasus can take advantage of weaknesses in these apps, so you don't even have to answer a call to get infected.
Obviously.
You could just miss a call and have no clue your phone's compromised.
So basically, this thing's a ghost.
Mhm.
And it can even, self-destruct so there's no trace, right?
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes it so hard to detect and so dangerous. Like, how do you prove you were hacked if there's no evidence left behind?
Okay, point taken. So it's sneaky, for sure. But what can Pegasus actually do once it's on your phone?
Think of it as having total access to your digital life. It can read your messages, listen to your calls, see your photos, your contacts, even track where you are. It's basically a remote listening device disguised as your phone.
Wow. That's way worse than I thought. And this isn't just hypothetical, right? Pegasus has been a big deal in India.
Oh, absolutely. Back in 2021, there were all these accusations that it was being used to target people in India, government officials, journalists, activists, you name it.
Yeah, that was a huge story. So what did the Indian government say about all this?
Well, they denied any involvement in unauthorized surveillance. They said that Indian law prevents that kind of stuff.
Right. But wasn't there a Supreme Court investigation into all of this? What happened there?
Yeah, there was a lot of public pressure, so the Supreme Court put together this committee of experts to look into it. But in the end, they said they couldn't find conclusive evidence that Pegasus was being used.
So case closed.
Well, not exactly. The committee also said the government wasn't, fully cooperating with the investigation, and the full report's still sealed.
So still a lot of unanswered questions. And that, from a UPSC perspective, brings up some really interesting issues about transparency and accountability and governance. That's definitely something they could ask about. Okay, so now let's switch gears a bit and talk about this recent U.S. court case. It's against NSO Group, the company that makes Pegasus. So why should someone in India studying for UPSC care about a U.S. court ruling?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. This is the first time that NSO Group has been held legally responsible for how Pegasus is used. That's a pretty big deal. It sets a precedent that could have global implications.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So what did the U.S. court actually decide?
They found that NSO Group broke U.S. cybersecurity laws by using, get this, WhatsApp to put Pegasus on people's phones, and they held them responsible for damages. We don't know how much yet, but still.
Wait, they used WhatsApp? Wow. Did WhatsApp even know about this?
That's the thing. NSO had to agree to WhatsApp's terms of service to use their software. So the court basically said they knew they were doing something wrong.
So we've got this incredibly powerful spyware that can operate in secret. Allegations of misuse in India. And now a U.S. court holding the makers of Pegasus accountable. This is some serious stuff, and it's important for you to understand it for those UPSC exams. We'll pick up right here after a quick break to dig even deeper into what all this means. But before we go, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Deep Dive for more analysis on topics that matter for the UPSC exam. We're here to help you crush those mains questions.
You know, this whole Pegasus thing really shows you how accessible this powerful surveillance tech is becoming. It's not just governments anymore. Even smaller groups could get their hands on it.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. So if a company can be held liable in a U.S. court, what does that mean for governments who might be using this with even less oversight?
It definitely sets a precedent. It shows that Using spyware like Pegasus won't just be ignored. Other countries might start taking legal action against these companies or put in place tougher rules.
So this brings us back to India. Given what's happened here with Pegasus and the Supreme Court investigation, could this U.S. case change how India deals with this kind of tech?
It's possible. The Indian government's trying to find a balance between national security and individual privacy. This case might push them towards more transparency and accountability, especially with groups advocating for stronger privacy protections.
Yeah, this really ties into some core UPSC themes: rule of law, transparency and governance, the balance between individual rights and national security. Pegasus is like a real-world example of all that.
Absolutely. The UPSC exam isn't just about memorizing facts, it's about analyzing complex issues, seeing different perspectives, and forming a strong argument. The Pegasus controversy is a perfect example of how to do that.
So let's say there's a UPSC question about how the Pegasus controversy affects India's democratic institutions. What are some key points our listeners should focus on?
First, they should talk about the potential for abuse. Pegasus could be used to target political opponents, silence critics, or undermine the press, all of which directly threaten a democratic society.
So it's not just about personal privacy, it's about protecting the institutions that make up our democracy.
Exactly. Second, they should talk about accountability. Who has the authority to use these powerful tools and when? What checks and balances are there? The lack of transparency around Pegasus's alleged use in India raises some big questions about oversight.
Especially since that full report from the Supreme Court is still sealed.
Right. Third, they need to discuss the legal framework. India needs clear laws about using these technologies. Laws that ensure they're only used when necessary with proper oversight and for legitimate reasons. The current laws are seen as outdated and not equipped to handle something like Pegasus.
Okay, so for our listeners, when tackling a UPSC question on Pegasus, they should focus on potential abuse, accountability, and a solid legal framework.
Exactly. And remember, it's all about balance. Acknowledge the legitimate security concerns, but also highlight the risks to individual rights and democratic values. That's what will make their answers stand out.
This has been really insightful and so relevant for our listeners getting ready for those UPSC exams. Now, let's look at some possible solutions and what's happening internationally to regulate spyware like Pegasus. Okay, so we've talked about the threats, the court cases, the ethical stuff. But what about solutions? What's being done to actually control this tech and stop it from being misused, especially in a country like India?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's something that's on everyone's mind, from policymakers to, well, everyone. There's this growing feeling that we need more global cooperation and rules to deal with spyware like Pegasus.
Okay, so are there any specific examples of things happening internationally that our listeners should know about?
Yeah, definitely. One big one is the EU's proposed AI Act. It's not just about spyware, but it aims to regulate these high-risk AI systems, including ones used for surveillance. So if it passes, it would put a lot of requirements on the people who make and use these systems, like being transparent and assessing the impact on human rights.
That sounds like a good step, but how do you enforce that globally?
Yeah.
Not every country is part of the EU, and even within the EU, there's going to be pushback, right?
Oh, for sure. Enforcement is a big challenge. That's why international cooperation is so important. We need agreements that set common standards and ways to hold people accountable, kind of like those international treaties on arms control. The goal is to stop these dangerous technologies from spreading and make sure they're used responsibly.
That makes sense. And this brings us to another key UPSC topic: India's role in global governance. So given its own experience with Pegasus, what can India do to contribute to these international efforts to, regulate spyware?
India's in a unique position, actually. It's the biggest democracy in the world. It's got this booming tech sector and a strong commitment to human rights. So it can really help shape global norms around surveillance tech.
So, what could that look like specifically? What concrete steps could India take?
Well, for one, it could actively participate in these international discussions, advocating for strong regulations and ethical guidelines. It could work with other countries to control the export of spyware to make sure it doesn't end up in the wrong hands. And domestically, India could lead by example, strengthening its own laws and oversight mechanisms so these technologies are used responsibly and without violating people's rights.
That's a pretty powerful image. India leading the way for responsible technology use globally. Definitely something that would impress those UPSC examiners.
And it's not just about taking a stand, it's also practical. In a world where everything's connected, misusing spyware anywhere is a threat to everyone. India has a real stake in making sure there's a more responsible and regulated global framework.
So to wrap things up for our listeners, the Pegasus story is way more than just a scandal. It's a wake-up call about the challenges and opportunities of the digital age. It shows us that tech advancements, not amazing, can also threaten our values and institutions.
Exactly. It highlights how important it is for informed citizens and future leaders like you to make sure these technologies are used ethically. The decisions you make will shape our digital world.
We've explored the technical side of Pegasus, the legal battles, the ethical issues, and the global attempts to regulate it. But we've only just scratched the surface. So keep learning, stay informed, and form your own opinions on this complex issue.
Remember, the UPSC exam isn't about memorizing facts. It's about thinking critically, analyzing, and deeply understanding the issues that are shaping our world. And the Pegasus controversy is a perfect example of that.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Pegasus spyware. We hope you found it helpful for your UPSC prep. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the deep dive for more in-depth analysis on current events and topics that are relevant for the UPSC exam. We're here to help you every step of the way as you become the leaders of tomorrow.